So we're going to look at the adventure of how the charts were created. As I mentioned before, the 12 sectors of the entire year of nature, where the sun goes above and below the equator, these 12 sectors, they form the basis of astrological charts. Now, there's something interesting about this because there's a relationship between the sun and the moon that's involved. So it turns out that the ancients had lunar calendars. We know that. And these 4 points, the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices, these have been there for over 32,000 years. We can find that in monuments that were, like Stonehenge is just one example, but there are many ancient monuments that try to line up stones with the equinoxes and solstices as a kind of calendar keeping. So it turns out that the moon increases over a period of 15 days and then decreases for 15 days. So from new moon to new moon, let's say, there's about a 30-day period. Increasing moon, decreasing moon. So the ancients thought and created months based on that, because that was easy to observe. 15 days increasing, 15 decreasing, and so we have months of 30 days each. So in the lunar calendar, 30 days is a month, approximately 29 point something, 29 and a half days. So we could say 30 days per month. And conveniently, it turns out that as the sun makes its trip, starting in spring, it goes up, higher and higher into the sky, and then goes down, 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 that every day it goes up 1 degree. 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree. So 30 lunar days essentially are 30 degrees of that circle of the sun. So if we look, we say, well, this quarter, talking about from spring to summer, that is a right angle. So if we divide it into 3 parts, each one of these is 30 degrees. 3 times 30 is 90-degree angle. So each sector, the beginning, the middle, and the end, forms really one lunar month, where the sun travels 30 degrees, 30 degrees, 30 degrees. So we have a circle, a year, basically. 360-degree, 12 lunar months. Over time, the calendars tried to compensate for the fact that the year is a little bit longer than 360 days, which would make the perfect circle. So there were things like adding a few days here and there after a certain time period, and leap years and so on. But the basic idea was, this was the structure, how the energies moved. Now, what about the constellations of the zodiac? How did they come to mean certain things? Why is Leo a fire sign? Why is Scorpio water sign, and so on? Is that mysticism? What's that based on? Well, I got a clue for that from 2 things. One was the names of the Adityas, the 12 solar energies, given by the ancients in the Vedic texts. And number 2, I also looked at Yajurveda, where the positions of the constellations were when this whole beginnings of astrology, let's say in ancient Sumeria 6,000 years ago, the astrological division into 12 sectors was created with different constellations. And then later on it was more formalized during the Greco-Roman period. So I was thinking, how did these things come up? Well, let's start with 6,000 years ago. So, as I mentioned, the energies at each position of the sun, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that, going around, there's different energies. In the peak of summer, we know it's hot, it's a different time. In the beginning of spring, there's a certain quality. In the middle of winter, in the deepest part of winter, there's certain energies. And in fall, there's certain energies. Meaning the weather changes, the feeling changes a little bit with the weather and the energies. Actually, the way Carl Jung put it, he was saying that as the cosmic energies shift, it makes sense that if you're born in one of these sectors, one of these seasons, when the sun is in one of these sectors, then you're going to experience some of those qualities. So, for example, if you're born during a time when the seasons are changing, that mutable or dual time, that going towards summer, from spring to summer, you might have more flexibility in your nature. You partake of some of those qualities. If you're born in a fixed time where the sun is in a steady part of the season, you might have a little more stability within your nature, within your soul. The sun represented the light, the energy within you. So that's how and that's how it goes, from cardinal or movable, fixed, and then changing. Movable, fixed, and changing. Movable, fixed, and changing. Like that. Movable, fixed, and changing. Goes all the way around like that. So, well, what about 6,000 years ago? 6,000 years ago, in spring, the constellation Taurus started spring. In other words, the sun in this position at the equinox was lined up with the zodiac part of the zodiac area. Here it was lined up with was Taurus constellation, and not even Taurus constellation so much as just a few stars or a star in that area. It became a marker, a label. Oh, it's lined up with Taurus was somewhere over here, and that's why we find in the Yajurveda, in the most ancient texts of the Vedas, we find in the Taittiriya Aranyaka, we find a description of the stars, and it says that spring, the equinox, starts with the moon, basically with the star Kritika. Kritika means Taurus constellation, actually. That's where it is, the name of the Kritika. So this was Taurus as a marker. Then the highest point of summer was Leo constellation, was lined up with the sun loosely. Then in fall, we had the constellation Scorpio. And then in winter, we had the constellation Aquarius. So these started to acquire meanings. So these markers, these labels, defined by the constellations that were there 6,000 years ago, they started having associations. So the Taurus constellation, if you think about it, that's the bull. And what do you do in spring? Well, you plow the land, there's fertility involved, life comes back. And so Taurus became associated with plowing, the fields, the energy of momentum forward, creative energy, fertile energy, nurturing energy of spring. And then when the sun rose to the highest point above the equator, well, that was the time where we had tremendous heat in the Leo constellation. So Leo constellation became associated with activity, dynamisms, royal energy, powerful energy, a lot of solar energy. And so the sun was considered very strong in Leo, because it is indeed, it's the highest point above the equator. So it's a peak of summer. And it was associated with fire. Fire, why? Because fire is, there's a lot of heat. Also the lions, it's known that in ancient Egypt during the peak of summer, the lions would come out. Also in Africa, the lions would come up out and drink at the watering holes. Because of the heat, they would drink more. So it was associated with the lion, with that royal energy. Okay. Now, in fall, when we were back at the sun went back to the equinox here, that was the time when the sun was, we're talking about 6,000 years ago, when the sun was aligned with the constellation Aquarius. So Aquarius became known as the constellation, no, excuse me, I said Aquarius, I meant Scorpio. Sorry. So Scorpio, backtracking here, Scorpio was the constellation that was associated with the sun at the equinox, Scorpio. So Scorpio was associated with what happens in fall. Well, fall, there's rain, so it was associated with a water sign. And then you have a lot of inward energy. You could say nature shutting down, preparation for winter. So the leaves fall off, everything is kind of shutting down. So it was associated with more inward, spiritual, transcending, going inward, inner knowledge, inner healing, a time of things shutting down and going inward. By the way, Taurus, being the beginning there, fertility and plowing the earth, had a kind of an earth association, earthy. Now we come to winter. So this is where the sun was lowest, and that was the Aquarius constellation. Lined up, the sun was loosely aligned with Aquarius constellation. And that was, as I say again, keep repeating, 6,000 years ago, in the time of Sumeria and so on. And so what happened there? Why is Aquarius associated? What is it associated with? Well, think of it. It's the middle of winter. And what do people try to do in the middle of winter? They try to survive. They try to work together in harmony so that they can maintain life for everybody. So Aquarius came to have the connotation or the meaning of social awareness, working together to better society. Now, do you see how these astrological signs started to acquire these qualities that people give them? And so these were the 4 seasons and the 12 divisions of the year. We call it Kala Purusha. Kala means time in the Vedic language, Kala, and Purusha means the great being. This is nature's chart, you could say. And in nature's chart, these 4 points that we call, these power points, where they're pivotal points of the seasons, they're considered to be the 4 houses, the first house, and then the 4th house, the 7th, and the 7th house, and so on, and then the 10th house. The 10th house of nature's chart. So these were called the kendras, the corners, the power points, the 4 energy points of the year of Kala Purusha. So if you had planets at one of these, or the sun was at one of these corner points, then we could say you had extra dynamism. Those qualities of those planets or energetics were more powerful and were leading you to, let's say, greater success. So that was called the kendras. All right. Now, what happens over time? Well, these numbers that we have for the different energetic positions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these sectors, well, the constellations will keep changing. Every 2,100 years, the constellations keep changing. So after 2,100 years, Taurus was no longer here. This is because the Earth has a wobble. It's tilted. It sort of wobbles a little bit. And this wobble was discovered, or at least expressed, by the great Greek Hipparchus. He was a mathematician and astrologer, and this was a couple hundred BC. He talks about the fact that the constellations keep changing in the sky. These markers keep changing because of the tilt of the Earth and wobble. So basically, everything kind of goes this way, so that eventually, so if Taurus was here, what happens is that it moves up. It moves up here, then it moves up here, and then moves up here. In other words, what happens is that because of the things rotate in the sky, now 2100 years later, Aries was the beginning of spring, and the star Ashwini was lined up with that Aries constellation and the sun. So that's why in the later Vedic text, you see in the Puranas and in the astrology books, you see that spring starts with the sun in Aries and the star Ashwini. Okay? So then what happened was Ashwini was here, the constellation Cancer was here, Libra was here, and then Capricorn was here. So everything rotated so that the constellations changed positions. And that brings me to the story of modern astrology, because there's some history to be known. Why is it that all the astrology books say the zodiac begins with Aries, and the Vedic astrology talks about the stars begin with Ashwini? That's the beginning of the zodiac stars, and so on. And this brings me to the Greco-Roman Empire. I had to study a little bit of history to understand what happened here. Why do we use these terms?